Okay, well, we're up to our normal sort of like 50 participants. Welcome to all the newcomers. Oh, we've got, well, Mike Smith, I'm going to put him on the spot now, but Mike Smith today has agreed to sort of like assist me in pulling together a sort of timetable of our future plans for presentations. I've already got a number of people signed up, other people who know they're going to do one in the future, we just haven't fixed the dates. And so aside from the Facebook group, we are going to now put them on the BMFA STC website. They'll still run on the 2 weekly basis. But then once we get to March next year, we'll just go to a month, because hopefully by March next year, we will be back to some sort of normality and actually be out and flying in a closer to how we used to. So we'll just go to once a month from then. But look at either the Facebook group or the BMFA STC website in the future for the other presentations. So with no further ado, we'll hand over to Mr. Stuart for his introduction to kit scale. I mean, kit scale is a fantastic class. It's something that any one of us could have a go at. And for those that are maybe on the RC or the outdoor RC side, then it's something to add an extra little bit of fun in the evening when we're camping in the airfields at international championships or other events. Over to you, Mike.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. Well, yeah, firstly, hello, everybody, wherever in the world you are. A special welcome to those signing in for the first time. Thanks to Graham for giving us another free flight slot. So this evening, I'm going to give an overview of the indoor kit scale class that we're flying at the indoor scale Nats in Wolverhampton next year. This is different from the kit scale class that's flown outdoors, which is more a precision event. So this is just for indoors. I'll give you an overview of the rules, looking at the very small amount of documentation that you need, suggestions for suitable types of kit manufacturers, and I'll look at how to impress the flight judges, and there'll be plenty of videos. To finish, I'll be sharing the challenges of building and flying a Comet 54-inch Taylorcraft in the class while keeping it under 200 grams. It should take about 40 minutes. There should be plenty of time for questions and discussion afterwards. Now, Rogers will be very kindly running the PowerPoint for me, as my broadband connection here is pretty rubbish. So if I ask Roger to share his screen and get the first slide up, thanks. All right. So the indoor kit scale class has been popular from the off. We ran it first in 2007, where we got 12 entries. And the hope was that the class had become a stepping stone to the open classes, where numbers have tended to drop off gradually over the years. But in fact, it hasn't really happened. And I think it's fair to say a lot of kit scale entrants are happy just to enter the class, have no desire to build more complex numbers. In terms of entries, that peaked into 2017. We ended up with 32 entries on the final results table. We actually had more entries than that, but not all the models were static judged, because some of them didn't get to fly very well. It did cause a problem on the day having that many entries due to the time needed to static judge all the models and get all the necessary flights fitted in. But I think this is a nice problem to have, and it shows strong support for the class. Next slide, please, Roger. So, summary of the rules. A key difference to other BMFA scale classes is that the model isn't judged against a 3D or photos of the real aircraft, but only against the kit plan. Anyone thinking of entering a vintage Keelcraft or Veron kit will be glad to hear that you're allowed to use your own wood and hardware. Achieving a qualifying flight using the supplied kit wood, prop and rubber would be, I think, an extreme challenge. Most of the ones I built as a kid never made it to the end of the garden. The new power source rule, which you can see in red there, was a response to comments from some modelers that the class seemed to have outgrown its simple beginnings, and it was being won with kits enhanced with detail and paint and printed finishes, electric motors, profilers, CO2 instead of rubber. And this raised the bar to a level where some club flies were a bit put off. So numbers started to fall off. Next slide, please. To perhaps illustrate this, this is Ian Melville's rubber-powered winning model from back in 2007, the first one we held. And it's exactly the type of model that was envisaged being entered, I think, when the class was introduced, built from the Her laser cut kit. Next slide. If you contrast this with Jonathan Markowitz's lovely CO2-powered stock with Camel from 2018, to get a CO2-powered biplane to fly as well as this did is a major achievement. The video that I'm going to show next was taken at Nijmegen, not at the indoor nats, but the class rules are identical. And to achieve consistent flights, John weighs each motor charge, runs off extra gas until the weight is the same for each flight. The model's built from the vintage model company kit. I think John's on tonight on this call, in which case I'm sure he'll be happy to answer questions afterwards at the end about this model and his CO2 motors. So let's have a look at the video now. So the last thing we want is for builders not to have a class they can enter their electric or CO2 powered kit models in. So that's why the new intermediate scale class has been introduced, but that is definitely a subject for another day. Next slide, please. So documentation for static judging. The one thing that puts people off entering the open classes is the high level of documentation that you need. As you can read here, all you need for kit scale is the kit plan and one photo, painting or drawing to illustrate your colour scheme. This makes it very accessible for all. If you haven't got an original kit plan, then a photocopy will do, or you can download a plan from AutoZone, and you can print it off on A4 sheets, sellotape them all together, and that will be just as good as far as the judges are concerned. Next slide. Now, if you're thinking of building from a vintage kit plan, it's good to know that the rules allow you to make some changes to improve the practicality of the design without being penalised. Most of the old 1930s comic kits, for example, just had the bolster undercarriage legs simply glued to the lower longerons, and that setup would probably not survive the first test line. Likewise, sensible sized removable nose blocks were not commonplace even into the 1950s. And moving the rear peg position up a couple of bays can save you a lot of nose weight if you've got a short nose subject. Any other deviations from the plan will be penalised. So if you put more dihedral in or you enlarge the tailplane, you will be penalised. So it's sensible to choose a subject where the kit design doesn't need that much alteration. Next slide. I'm not going to spend too much time on this slide other than to comment that your maximum static score is 100 points if you add all those up, 95 if you paint your model because you take a 5-point hit for that. And then to say that the maximum flying mark you can get is 300 points. So in the great scheme of things, a few deviations from the plan or a painted finish isn't going to have a huge effect on your overall mark. It's the flying that's important, so don't worry too much about that. So I thought I'd select a few photos of models that have top scored in static and kit scale over the last few years. We can have a look at those. So next slide, please. So 2008, Dave Crompton got the top mark, 87 points, with this Keelcraft Piper Super Cruiser. Nicely finished in cream and red tissue. Nice simple model. Next slide. Another Keelcraft Piper, this time the family cruiser, another favourite, built by John Churchill. He got 85 points. Very simple tissue finish scheme, but very neatly done. That's all you need for this class, something like this. Next slide. This is something a bit special. We had a visit in 2012 at the Indoor Nationals by Enrique Maltz from Israel, who is a very special modeler. As you can see, the engine detail on this is all way beyond that is normally expected in the kit scale entry. This is the Flyline really monocoque kit. So Enrique got 92 points in static. Didn't win though, because again, it's the flying that's the important thing. But absolutely gorgeous model. Next slide. Another one I really like. This is 2013. John Whitmore built this DXU Chipmunk from the Frog kit. Beautiful example of finishing in coloured tissue. Even the red maple leaves are cut out of red tissue. The anti-glare panels, black tissue. It's beautifully done. Flew very well as well, I remember. Next slide. A rather unusual entry from Simon Rogers. I love the choice of subject. A Besson MB11, I'd never heard of it. It's produced by Ozark Model Aviation Kit, which is a US company selling mostly mid-kit designs. I cannot remember if it took off using wheels under the float or if it had a dolly. I'm sure someone who was there will be able to tell us afterwards. Next slide. So we'll finish this section with the winner from 2019, top in static and overall winner by Jonathan Markowitz again. This is electric powered. With the new rules, this model would have to be entered in the intermediate class, so I'm sure it would do really well. And for the last few years, I've been telling anyone who will listen that the way to do well indoors is to build a large, light model that floats around the hall. And John comes along with this little peanut, blows everybody away with the highest flight score by a mile. So it just shows that in this hobby, you never stop learning. But a lovely little model. And I hope we'll see it again perhaps in the intermediate class next year. So next slide, please. Let's have a look at flight judging now. As has been mentioned before, flights are judged on realism, not duration. But you have to stay in the air for 10 seconds to register an official flight. The judges award marks for the takeoff, climb out, the cruise, the descent, and the landing, plus an additional mark for realism in flight. The other marks are self-explanatory, but the realism in flight mark is more subjective. It could include the sit of the model in the air, flight speed, smoothness, etc. If you're having trouble getting your model to take off, then a hand launch is perfectly acceptable, though of course you lose any takeoff marks. And despite what it says here, it's extremely likely you'll get 4 flight attempts. Only once has a round had to be dropped due to time pressure. And the ratio of flight score to static has now changed with the new rules. Previously, the total score was the best 2 flights plus static, giving a ratio of flying to static of about 2:1. The position is now 3 times the best score plus the static score, and gives a ratio of 3:1. Now, we haven't had a chance to run an event with the new rules yet, but I think what this change means is that if you have a simple model that flies well, even if it doesn't score highly in static, you now have a better chance of finishing near the top of the class. With only the best flight counting towards the final score, it also means you can keep tweaking the trim between flights to try and get that perfect final flight. So let's see a nice flight from the rubber-powered kit scale model. This is Ian Lever's de Havilland Portsmouth, which won in 2015. So let's have a look at that one.
There's a very high level of qualifying flights coming on the kit scale. It's very encouraging.
Looks good here. Yes, it is. Yes, very good. Well done. Not looking there, was it? No.
Okay, now next slide, please. So let's have a talk about choice of subject and kit manufacturer. If you're new to the hobby, then although it's very tempting to build a Spitfire, I would strongly recommend leaving that until a bit later and instead choose a high-wing cabin monoplane, as it will be much easier to trim. If I had to choose an ideal first kit scale model, it would be one of the two vintage model company Cessnas shown here, both from the magnificent Flying Machines range designed by Andrew Darby. They're laser cut, the wood's excellent quality, plans are well detailed, instructions are also really good, and they fly well. Next slide. You can probably tell I'm a bit of a fan of the range, and I built a bird dog myself. As soon as the kit came out, I bought one, had to build it. I flew it in the kit scale class at Nijmegen in 2019. I painted mine, as you can see. I took the 5-point hit, but I couldn't resist adding a few extra scale details as well, like the antenna and the avionics lump and the exhausts. It finished comfortably mid-tape, so it flew really well. Next slide. There's plenty of other manufacturers who do laser cut models that would make good entries, including her, Dumas and Easy Built models. Some of the newer Easy Built kits are very good lightweight designs, including this Wacko Model N by John Holman. And if you want to build a biplane without worrying about all those K-bind struts, then Wackos make very good subjects. Next slide. If you want to do a World War I biplane, then the Fokker D7 is a good first subject, as it's got very little rigging. Monique Lyons won the class in 2018 with this her Fokker D7, and the kit must have had some nice light wood in it because it flies fairly slowly, as you'll see in the video. Yeah, let's see the video now, Roger.
Yeah.
That's how Butch used to fly too, because he used to do 0-0. He was up all that.
So this might be a good point to talk about how to impress the flight judges. That Fokker D7 flight was one of the highest scoring from that year. Ideally, you want your model to track straight on the takeoff run. This is tricky to achieve with rubber power, as the model usually leaps off the ground pretty quickly and heads into its circling pattern. Funnily enough, models with large wheel spats tend to be quite good at straight takeoff runs, as I've found with a couple of my models. Trouble is, it's a bit disconcerting as they head off straight towards the wall and then at some point decide to rock into their turns, but they sometimes leave it really late. For the cruise phase of the flight, using a large portion of the hull to circle in is usually well received, as is the gaining of a decent height. Approach to landing should be smooth and steady, not a sudden dive for the runway. And when landing, a smooth touchdown is desirable. Try not to hit the ground too fast and then bounce up again. So with a rubber model, you'll be trying to land with some turn still on the motor. So you come in smoothly and don't suddenly drop down to the ground. So Dan Meller shows us how it's done. I've got a video here of his 36-inch span CO2 powered Piper Cub. CO2 motors can be tricky to set up as performance varies with temperature and humidity. But when everything goes right, they can produce superb flights like this one. They tend to not jump off the ground quite so suddenly as rubber models. That's a definite plus. Dan's model is eligible for the intermediate scale class next year, so I really hope we get to see it in action again. So if you could show the video, Roger, please. Thanks.
It's an aerodynamic cycle. Again, CO2 power. Sorry, Western. Qualified. There's something rather special about the little piston going up and down and making that noise in an aeroplane, isn't it? Very good scale speed, which is a thing which is always very difficult to achieve with a scale model. No question about this being a qualifying flight.
Good boy.
How lovely is that? This is Dave Monk.
So I got impressively high that flight, didn't it? That's quite tricky to pull off, because if you just overcook it ever so slightly, you're up in the roof structure. Disaster looms. Next slide, please. If you're happy to scratch build, there's a treasure trove of vintage kit designs out there to choose from. Some UK modelers may be tempted to revisit their youth, build something from the Keelcraft and Veron flying scale ranges that so many of us cut our teeth on. Best subject for beginners, of course, are the high wing cabs, some of which we've already seen, but the more adventurous, how about the Veron Harvard or Short Seamew, both of which I saw flying well in 2014. The Seamew there's got a inkjet printed finish, by the way, on the tissue, which, if I'm correct, I think also suffers a 5-point deduction, as like for painted models. The Harvard is just entirely just covered in coloured tissue. Next slide. Now, to encourage more Veron True Flight models, there's a special trophy which is awarded to the highest placed model from the range in memory of their designer Phil Smith. I've spent many hours poring over this list on the right here back in the day, deciding what to spend my pocket money on next. I must admit, I'm tempted to give the Swordfish a go, but the nose is very short, so keeping the tail light will be vital to keep the weight down. Also quite fancy the Chiltern as well. That's another of my favourites from that range. Next slide. Another possibility is to go back in time even further to the 1930s and build one of many lightweight designs from American companies like Comet. As mentioned before, the rules are written so that modifications to make the model more practical are not penalised. This is Comet's Stinson Reliant from their excellent 25-inch span range, and I'm surprised we don't see more of these entered. Changes I would make to this design would include moving the wing spars to the top of the wing to reduce the risk of them curling up after covering. I'd move the rear peg up at least one bay. I'd strengthen the undercarriage, and I'd wrap the cowl with balsa instead of paper, so to give you something more substantial to hold on to when you're winding it. Next slide. Mick Langford built one of these Stinson Reliants, entered it in 2016. Very nicely finished in inkjet printed tissue. and Mike he duplicated the colour scheme that was on the box top. Very nice model, flew well. Next slide. I entered kit scale myself for the first time only in 2016 with this 34-inch span Blackburn Shark by Comet. And it was never intended to fly this indoors. I built it to fly outdoors in calm weather. But after the success of my Foxmoth indoors, I thought I'd give it a go. As you can see, the structure's very sparse for such a large model. Although many details are shown on the plan, including the torpedo, which I think looks really good on the finished model. This kit was part of a range of British types designed by Comet for FP Sweeton in Blackpool. And some of the range are more detailed than others. They do a particularly nice Gloucester gauntlet, which is very detailed and looks really accurate. Next slide, please. So here it is under construction. You can see from the bones that there's plenty of air between the balsa. The all-up weight came out at 140 grams. It's not bad for a 34-inch span biplane. I managed to trim it to fly in the hall at Bushfields Leisure Centre at one of the Peterborough Club sessions. So I thought I'd enter it in the indoor nats 2016 and managed to finish second in class despite a fully painted finish. When you see the video in a minute, you'll notice a really annoying power stall at the start of the flight, which could easily have been cured with a bit more down thrust. Okay, let's see the video, Roger, thanks.
Is this the second piece now? Yes, it's still on the plan.
It's because it's white.
You might have noticed a bit of a wobble as the model flew down through its own downwash. That's a common sight with indoor models because they're flying a completely regular circuit. It's always on the descent part of the flight and it's never on climb. Incidentally, they had the Shark out yesterday. Such a wonderful weather yesterday. Took it to Port Meadow in Oxford with several other models and got some really nice flights out of it. We had 3 mile-an-hour winds yesterday. That just never happens in the UK, so it was not to be missed. So let's have the next slide, Roger. I'm going to finish this little talk to share some lessons that I've learned about building a Comet 54-inch span Tailorcraft to fly indoors. This is the plan for it. While trying to keep under the 200-gram weight limit, which was in place at the time. Now, Richard Crossley must take some of the blame for this, as he was thinking of building the Aeronca Chief in the same range, and he encouraged me to join in. We had many discussions about how to keep the weight down without straying too far from the original designs. You can see from the plan that the model has separate ailerons, elevators, rudder, and even opening doors. The undercarriage is a piece of 1/8-inch sheet with a pin attached at the bottom, onto which the wheels are mounted. This will definitely not survive the first landing. Next slide, please. I was fortunate enough to be in possession of an original kit, and it's amazing how they could fit such a large aeroplane model into such a small box. There was a lot of splicing of wood and strips needed if you used the kit wood, which I almost entirely didn't. One modification is shown here. The main spar on the kit is 3/16 by 3/8. It's on the bottom of the wing. And I used 2 3/16 square spars, kept one at the bottom, moved the other one to the top. It makes a much sturdier wing. I also use very light wood for everything, including the wing spars, which is not something I'd normally do. Next slide. And here's the bones beginning to come together, and you can see that again there's a lot of space between the wood. Comet, we're definitely trying to save money on balsa with this one. Next slide. I used almost my entire stash of Visaki white tissue to cover the wretched thing. And you can see another modification here, the sheeting on the decking in front of the windscreen. The kit gives paper patterns to use, which I tried to use, but they looked so terrible that I ended up sheeting it in. It looks much nicer. Next slide. So, some painting has obviously been happening here. It's been airbrushed with extra colour RAF high-speed silver enamel, which is the paint I like to use to replicate a silver doped fabric on an airframe. And this was the stage when I really got nervous about the weight. I realised I'd hardly have anything left for the rubber motor, which would have to be very, very short. Talking to Richard, I found out that his rear rubber peg was right at the wing trailing edge, a bay further forwards than mine. If you look on this photo, you can see a faint little arrow on the fuselage side, shows where my peg location was. So in a bid to minimise nose weight, drastic action was needed. Next slide. So I stripped all this newly painted tissue off the sides of the model, removed the stringers, put the rear peg anchorage right under the wing trailing edge, as you can see there. A couple of diagonal supports in the peg location to the longerons to reinforce that. So the beauty of that is that the centre of gravity of the motor is now ahead of the centre of gravity of the model. So the rubber motor would contribute to the nose weight and minimise the amount of nose weight I would then have to add. You can see the wing mount well on this photo as well. Slots for the two stub spars, plus a hole for the rubber bands to pass through. And there's hooks mounted on the wing roots to carry the rubber bands. The hedral's fixed by the wing struts, which also fit into the lower slots. And again, rubber band to hold the strut lower ends together. And I was so desperate that another thing I did to save weight was to cut my balsa wheels in half, hollow them out with a Dremel, glue the halves back together again, which saved me a whole 3 grams. But that's 3 grams more I could put on the motor. Next slide. So here's the model finished with all the markings on. The propeller on this is the 12-inch easy-built one, which works really well. If you're flying outdoors without the need to take off, the model would comfortably handle a larger diameter prop. So after adding 3 grams of nose weight, plus the rear peg, plus the rubber bands holding the wings on, I had a grand total of 17 grams left for the rubber motor to give me an all-up weight of 199 grams. The motor was 5 loops of 1/8, and it was about 2 inches longer than the peg to hook distance, so really short. It's not ideal, but I did just get in under the weight limit. As you'll see in the video you'll see next, the cruise portion of the flight is fairly short. If I put more winds on, then the power ran out while the model was still in the air, which leads to far too steep a descent and landing. So let's have a look at that video. Thanks. I think both Richard and I found trimming these floaty monsters was actually pretty simple. They're very docile and they fly so slowly and easily circle in the confines of the ball. In fact, mine circles in just a tiny corner of the hull. You may have noticed the droop left aileron on it, on the tail craft as it circled around. This is to hold the left wing up in the turn by increasing the lift at the left wingtip. For a model without hinged ailerons, you could get the same effect by using a trim tab on the trailing edge bent down or a gurney strip added under the trailing edge near the tip. Both of these would have a similar effect. The turn really needs opening out a bit, but the rudder's so big that a small adjustment can lead to a dramatic change in the trim. So I have to be careful how I move it. I'll have to have catches arranged around the wall, I think. It would perhaps be safer to add a gurney strip on the right side of the rudder trailing edge and adjust the length until I have the circuit diameter I want. That does mean there'll be a bit of an ugly lump on the side of the rudder. So I think I'm going to go for the tweak the rudder and hope. Next slide, please. Now, Richard's choice of subject was perhaps more sensible than mine, as the Aronka Chief from the same range doesn't have separate control surfaces, which saves a fair bit of weight. Plus, he used coloured tissue, so saved the weight of the paint. He had plenty in hand under the 200-gram limit and could use a much longer motor than me. The weight limit for kit scale at the 2021 indoor nats has gone up to 250 grams now. So I'm looking forward to trying a much longer motor in the Tailorcraft next time. I think you'll agree this is a great photo by David Brahid, by the way. It's cracking. So yeah, to conclude, I hope that some people who are new to the hobby, perhaps including some who've taken it up for the first time during lockdown, will be encouraged to give kit scale a go at the indoor nats next April. Whatever your level of experience, I'm sure you'll have a great day out, and I guarantee to receive a lot of encouragement and help and advice from fellow competitors. And by way of further inspiration, I'll finish this talk with by showing the video of Richard's winning flight at the 2019 Nijmegen indoor meeting. I think this is kit scale flying at its finest.
Ja, weet je, ze hebben het maximum gewicht van 200 gram. Maar niet groot, als je het daar net kan houden, volgens mij weegt 170, 180 gram. Dan krijg je een vleugelbelasting van 1 miljoen. Dat is echt geweldig.
Well, I think I've unmuted myself there. Thank you very much, Mike, for that really informative chat. I've been lucky enough to attend numerous indoor nationals, the interscale that was held in the UK in 2004 and everything, and have seen kit scale develop throughout, but I've learned quite a lot tonight as well, so thank you very much. I saw lots of inquisitive faces, lots of very pleased faces, and I always marvel at your neatness of building, Mike. When you're complaining about a little power stall at the beginning of the Blackburn Shark flight, where I would be quite happy with it. I would be over the moon with a flight like that. But it also shows like how much people think free flight is a very simple thing. They also think that there isn't that much of a challenge to it. But what you've done with, and Richard Crossley as well, flying a 54-inch aircraft indoors, look at what you can do. Plenty of challenges there. I want to go to a couple of people first before we open up to questions. So we'll go to Mr. Pallister, the BMFA chairman, first of all. Ian, of course, you set up the kit scale class initially, so would you like to make any comments on how you've seen it develop over the years?
Yeah, well, thanks. I was going to put my hand up to say a few words if you hadn't invited me, so thanks for that. Yeah, just picking up on what Mike said to start with. I took over running BMFA indoor scale at a time when the numbers had been dropping, particularly in CO2 and so on. And the first thing I did was to consult a number of competitors for their ideas as to what might reinvigorate it. And the best of those suggestions came from my dear late friend Mike Golby, who was the former BMFA development officer, and that's where the idea of kit scale sort of came as an introductory class, which, as you've seen, even simple models can fly exceptionally well. The very first event we ran actually was a trial event at Olympia in London, which was being renovated at the time, and we managed to get access to it. And Neil Somerin actually won that first event with a Jodel, which sort of gave us the confidence to run it at the Nationals. I don't know whether I can share my screen. If I can, I've got a photograph of the trophy that we now award for it, which was generated from the sale of some of Mike's models sadly after he died, a memorial trophy. If I can, I don't know. Am I able to share my screen? By any chance?
Hold on a minute.
There, Roger will just give you the
Yeah, you can now.
permission.
Yeah. Let me just see if I can get this up. There we go. I don't know whether you can see that. Does that come up for everybody?
No.
No.
Hang on just 1 minute.
Let me just go back to my. There we go.
That's it. Oh, yeah.
Is that there?
Yeah.
Yeah. This is a solid silver replica of Mike's Nationals winning peanuts. It was a scratch-built peanut that he built with a Piper Cub with spats. I say we had that commissioned in solid silver, and that's now awarded every year for the event. But no, I've been absolutely delighted with how it's how do I unshare that? Stop share. There we go. How it's developed over the years. Obviously, this last year the rules have morphed. I'm not precious about that. It was very much a finger in the air to see what would work to start with. So it'll be very interesting to see how the changes do work. We allowed changes of power source to start with to stimulate activity and stimulate interest. But as Mike says, the electric and CO2 has tended to take over quite a bit. So it'll be interesting to see, going back to the purity of rubber. If I'm right, am I right in thinking that if alternate power sources are shown on the plan, they are still allowed?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, Dan Miller is very carefully selecting kits that have alternative power sources.
The beauty of scale aero modelling, eh?
Yeah, the key to when we set the rules originally was that forfeits or negative marks if you put too much into it, and that was to discourage the top entrants from sort of over-egging the pudding and to even the playing field. And certainly it's proved that a well-built simple model that flies well is going to win it. So yeah, the more the merrier. But having judged it the year that we had 40-odd entries, it was challenging.
Thanks, Ian. Just quickly before I go to Andy, Mike Barbie. Yeah, so you've seen how an Aeronca Chief or a Comet Aeronca Chief can fly now. So I'm expecting to hear if Top Gun goes ahead in October, that you've beaten Dave Platt. What? Oh, if you want to unmute yourself. There we go. There's your challenge.
My full-scale Chief doesn't fly that well. No, you know what? I'm amazed. I'm amazed. I'm going to work at it though. I am. I'm going to try to get it going.
Well,
yeah.
You've now got the contact with Mike.
Yeah.
Your namesake to assist you. I'm sure I'm sure
Yeah.
you'll manage more than how many seconds? No, I'm not going to say.
I got started on my full-scale project.
Yeah,
I have the vertical stabilizer and rudder built.
excellent.
Yep.
Mike currently is building a RANS 21.
S20 outbound, yeah.
So
Yep.
he'll be hosting a future session when the progress has gone a little bit more, so you can see how a full scale, like well, what's the description of it? We can't say composite. It's a full scale. Is it termed an ultralight or?
Experimental. It's experimental.
Okay, full size
Yeah.
experimental.
Yeah, experimental category. Yeah, 2 place. Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, good talking to you.
And you, Andy, you've got a couple of questions.
Yeah, there's several in there, Mike. Are you there still?
Yeah,
Listening. I'm interested in how you keep the weight down. You said that you use lightweight wood, which is great, but we all know that glues weigh a lot. So what glue did you use for the sticking the bolster together? What did you use to put the tissue on? And what did you finish with the tissue? How did you finish the tissue before you painted it? And how did you prevent the warps?
Right.
There you go. There's a few for you.
I use Type-Bond 1, the original Type-Bond in the red bottle for all my models. I think that comes fairly light. Comes up fairly light, I think, and you can sand it. It sands better than Type-Bond too. So I stick my tissue on. I do it the old-fashioned way. I dope my airframes with a couple of coats of full-strength dope, and then apply the tissue by flooding thinners through the tissue to reactivate the dope underneath. I shrink by wafting the parts over a kettle. Actually, what I will say for the tailorcraft, for the tail surfaces on the tailorcraft, which were a bit fragile, I pre-shrunk the tissue first on a frame to take some of the shrinkage out, because the Saki does shrink fairly majorly.
It can be quite vicious, can't it?
And so so I put it on the frame, waft it over the kettle to tighten it, and cut it off the frame and apply it as normal. And then it's got a bit of shrink left in it, to just get rid of the odd wrinkle or loose bit, but it's not enough pull left to distort the parts. And I use non-shrinking dope to finish, and I just do one coat, even on the 54-inch model, one coat thin 50/50 is all it had before I airbrushed it. So,
you airbrush the dope on?
No, airbrush the paint on afterwards. No, the dope's just slapped on with a brush.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and as to building light, I can build a 30-inch model really light, just because I can handle the wood sizes that you need. If you make it out of 16th square, I can handle 16th square. You just got to be careful handling it. What I cannot do is build a lightweight peanut, because I just can't handle the wood sizes. I can't work with 32nd square, it just breaks all the time. 20th square for my peanuts is the best I can manage. So yeah, I'm looking forward to Mike Hadlin giving a talk on how he does his peanuts, because I just can't do that. So I can build big models light, but I can't build little models light.
Okay, thanks, Mike. That was informative.
Thank you. Any other questions? Doug, you've always got a question. Not yet. Oh, I've got one before. George?
Well, this might be a good one.
Oh, yes. Right, come on, Mr. Candelitis.
Yeah,
you want to unmute? There we go.
I just did. Hi, everybody first. Okay, the rules are new. They haven't been tested. It's an experiment, or an attempt, not an experiment. What is the purpose of increasing furthermore the flight percentage in the final score?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yes, please. You
Yeah,
did all
definitely.
the rule changes last
you
year.
Did,
I said,
you did it.
I delegated the task, and I said you need to take responsibility for what you've done. So You're on.
Don't I always, Mr. Sefton? Don't I always? George, what we're trying to do is to encourage essentially the flyers that are out in the clubs in the UK to come along and take part in the competition. And that's the reason that we put a greater emphasis on the flight score rather than the static score. And we're hoping that somebody who's flying a reasonably built model, but getting some reasonable times out in the clubs, will actually come along and compete with us. That's not to say that we still don't appreciate the qualities of the scale modeler when he wants to improve the kit that he's working on. But that's the reason that we've introduced the intermediate class, which is more of a step up from the very, very basic rubber model towards our open classes. So that was the logic. And what we tried to do is for the kit scale class to make the ratio 3:1 flight to static. For the intermediate class, we've tried to make the ratio approximately 2:1. And for the open classes, they stay the same as they always were, where the static and the flight marks were equivalent. So that's it in a nutshell.
Okay, I've only once competed in free flight, and that was at the Eddie Riding Trophy a good few years ago, which Dad will remember me furiously building a Dornier 27 for it. Without getting too involved in the rules, one thing that I would sort of ask is, why is it gone to just one flight? If the emphasis on flight, then what I sort of think is that it should be looking at consistency of flight rather than, I don't know, can you get a freak good flight in free flight?
You can. I think the logic.
That's just for my own understanding.
Yeah, the logic is basically, and it was brought up by 2 or 3 of the regular flyers indoors. The logic is that with a new model, somebody turning up at that competition might take a number of flights to actually get that model sorted. And for the very experienced modelers, then the trimming process is relatively easy compared to the guys who are just out in the clubs and not building to the same level. So it was to, again, encourage guys that are out in the clubs who have a new model that they built specifically for the event to come along, get some expert help at the event, do a certain number of trimming flights in the trimming sessions, and then try and improve their flights through the rounds. And that was the reasoning to pick on just a multiple of the best flight. Now, if that doesn't work at the end of the day, Graham, then it will be up for grabs for change in the future. But that was the logic behind it.
Cool, thank you. Andy, you were waving again.
I was waving, yeah. I was one of the ones that requested we go to one flight rather than 2, because of the amount of entries, we were going down to possibly 3 rounds. And the philosophy, as I saw it behind kit scale, was that it was a beginner's competition. And to expect a beginner to make 2 good flights out of 3 was just a little bit too much, I felt. So I thought it should be just 1 flight.
No, I'm fine. I mean, I discovered
that was my reasoning behind it. And to go back to what Doug said earlier, and to just put an emphasis on it, we had a lot of rule changes last year, and a lot of people didn't like them. But the remit that we decided on was what we're doing at the moment is not working. The numbers that we're getting into the competitions are going down and down and down. Nobody's coming in at the bottom. So we've got to find a formula to bring new people in. And so we've made changes, or Doug's recommended the changes that we agreed last year, having done a lot of research. And the changes that we've done is hopefully to encourage new blood. Now, it's going to annoy some of the old blood because nobody likes change, and we have to accept that. But to give George a slightly different answer to Doug's with a slightly different emphasis, the change is to encourage new people. We felt that encouraging the flight score, reducing the number of flights to 1 and giving the flight score more of a weighting should help to encourage people to come in with flying models that are scale as opposed to scale models that fly. There you go.
Well, I mean, I for one,
I'm too far out there, Doug. Is that?
Say again.
I don't think I'm too far out with that.
No, you're spot on, Andy. Yeah, you're spot on. Yeah.
I mean, I'm trying to find where Dad is, but I know when I was trying to trim my Dumas Piper Cub Coupe out in Florida a couple of years ago to compete against Mr. Barbie with his aircraft that was 3 times bigger than mine, I found I was delighted just to get one flight that looked half decent, and then I would make the slight adjustment and then bang. So yes, I certainly can attest to that newcomer thing that you're talking about. See someone else I'm going to pick on, which is a newcomer to this tonight. I'm delighted to see him, and so you'll find out, you might not come back after I'm picking on him now, but Peter Fardell. Nice to see you tonight. You're someone who, the first time I met you was you came along to Nottingham quite a few years ago to fly. It was Osteraro, was it? Is that right?
Yeah.
Do you want? So you're someone that's come along early time in kit scale, and you now build. You never shirk from a challenge, is what I could say. Do you want to make any comments? Just about your experiences of kit scale and how it's invigorated your enthusiasm.
For me, it definitely worked as a way in. I've been sort of humming and hawing, like going to the Nationals for a long time. And Graham Banham, really, who gave me loads of encouragement through internet forums mainly. And yeah, Oster Arrow was my first one, and I finished 4th for my first year, which was a good encouragement. But that was largely down to the people who've been doing it for 2 years, like Graham, Lawrence Marks, just a few other people, just encouraging me really and giving me tips on the day. And yeah, once I realised I could actually fly something indoors, then I just kept building what I like really. But I still like kit scale. I have entered the other classes, and I probably will keep entering the other classes. But kit scale is still good fun, I think, and I wouldn't like it to get to the stage where the expert builders are put off kit scale. And I hope that won't happen because, well, obviously Mike and people are still entering it. So yeah, I'd recommend anyone to do it who hasn't tried it, because it's brilliant fun, and really all the help you get. There's not much pressure on the day because it's such a friendly atmosphere.
Thank you, Pete. And for anyone who wants a very amusing and entertaining thing, you have to have a look at Pete's backyard Lario videos, which I think are on YouTube, which he said is one of the things. Yeah, one of the things that he set up during lockdown, and I know I for one was wanting to see what musical accompaniments and little adventures the aircraft was going to go and in the backyard, and Pete's sort of been encouraged from this very simple aircraft, we'll say, and you're now building a more scale a far more scale version. But look at what kit scale has done with Pete. Yeah, thanks, Pete. Anyone else? Ricky Bould.
Yeah.
Always Ricky. On you go.
Yeah. For us, we've been running kit scale probably just after you people started, and with the numbers we get, because we really only meet up at our nationals, it's gradually grown. It's been interesting because last year we flew it and a whole bunch of the radio slope soarers decided this would be a fun thing to have a go at. And I've had something like 30 VMC kits have gone into various people. If we even get a fraction of them, we'll have done well. So there'll be a lot of Cessna 140s and bird dogs at this year's nationals. But the nice part is the bird dog has got so many color schemes that there probably is going to be quite a good variety of models. But we found the same, but what we also do is fly the same rules outdoors for our kit scale. And that seems to also work pretty well. So yeah, I concur. It does get some more interest. You get the occasional junior. I guess you just got to cross your fingers and hope that we get a bit more interest. But, and I mean, I've built the Veron Compa Swift, which flies really well. Oh, there's the Luscombe Sedan that is a Veron kit as well. Stan Major's got an Oster Arrow. So there's, I mean, there's just so much choice. And technically, I've got a Belenka, Flyline Belenka Skyrocket. I don't know whether it's going to be light enough to fly indoors, but it'll certainly go out for an outdoor one. So yeah, well done, Mike. It really shows up what can be done. And of course, you've got another 50 grams for rubber now, haven't you?
Yay!
Yeah, while you discuss that, I'll show you the current state of my kit scale model.
But it's seen for us as a fun class, and I'm glad it hasn't become one of those too serious events, because there are a lot of people who just don't want to invest the time.
Yeah, I mean, you can knock up a kit scale model in a couple of weeks, can't you? Really?
Yeah. Yeah.
Mike. While Graham's off ferreting in his model, you were talking about next year trying the Tailorcraft in the indoors and opening out the turn, and you were concerned about the size of the rudder and that being potentially a difficult thing to control. What you didn't mention, and what I'd recommend that you think about trying, is a tiny bit of tip weight on the center of gravity line, so that you don't change your longitudinal trim, but it'll widen out your turn, and you can do it incrementally with very small weights, just to tread, test the water as you go. And it's something that actually we used to use a lot years and years ago, but you don't actually see it used very often these days. But it is a good way of controlling your turning trim.
It's another tool in the armory. The advantage that the tip weight has over a drooped aileron is that it's not speed dependent, is it?
Yeah, that's right. And it can be invisible, because by the time you fix your tip weight, you can put a tiny slug of solder or something that's the same weight, which is invisible as well eventually. Yeah.
I mean, trimming, say indoor trimming or generally free flight scale trimming is probably worthy of a session to itself, I guess, isn't it? At some point.
Is that an offer while Graham's not here?
I'm back, Doug.
I don't consider myself a particularly good trimmer. I think there's people out there who are much better than me.
Well, maybe it's Graham Banham's turn to have a little bit of a go.
It's a good subject, though.
It is, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I'm being cheeky there, Graham. We've got. We're definitely going to work towards more of the technique events, but here we go. This was my Stinson Reliant from the large Dumas kit. So this wingtip looks okay, but this is what happens when your flatmate's Russian blue decides to fall off the cabinet on top of it just before it gets covered. So that is currently in the to be rebuilt phase, but it will get there. The other thing that I'm going to say, Mike, when I went through, this is something else that I found. I knew I had a couple. So if you would like some more white Isaki from Sam's, I'll be quite happy to hand it over to you when we next meet.
I've been reduced to stealing white Isaki from my Dave Deals kits. It's that bad.
There we go. One thing that Andy's just mentioned there, which is something that I alluded to in the Facebook group invite, is Mike has an absolutely superb website that you should definitely visit. So Andy's just sort of, well, Andy, you asked the question.
Well, it's there really. Mike has a website, but what he did on it was build a Varian Compa Swift, which is an ideal kit scale model. It was Ricky bringing up the Compa that reminded me of it. And I must say that anybody who wants to build a kit scale type model or a lightweight balsa model or one of the Keelcraft Varian scale models, I point them towards Mike's site. I can see him going red now, but he does an absolutely superb series from getting the plan all the way through to trimming the model. I don't know if you want to add to that, Mike.
No, probably about 10 to 15 people have built Compa Swifts using that guide, which is very pleasing. Sent me pictures of the finished models, and I think almost everyone's got them to fly as well. So it's, as Ricky says, it's a really good performer, that one. Not too
It's an exceptionally useful site of yours. Can you remind us what the web address is, please?
It's ffscale.co.uk. It's a free flight scale, but it's ffscale.co.
So ffscale. I'm just going to bung it on the chat line. I've got it somewhere. I'm going to have to. I can't.
And to give people an idea, my Compas weigh about 20-ish grams. Probably not absolutely lightweight, but you know, sufficiently light that they perform well, and they'll perform well outdoors as well. You know, when I got everything dialed in, I'm seeing something like 45 to 60 seconds. So just gives you an idea. And they weren't difficult to trim out.
No.
But then I've got a thing about Compas, as Andy well knows.
As do my friends at the Real Airplane Club, who have been providing you with additional information recently.
Yeah, he's been so helpful. It really has been really appreciated. And yeah, I mean they just work well.
Yeah.
The full size is similar. I had the privilege of flying one in a mock air race, and because it's such a speedy airplane, I have to say I did fudge the handicapping a little bit, and in the last lap overtook the other 5 airplanes and got a telling off my wife for showing off. And I said the hint is in the name. They didn't call it the Compa Slow.
Now, David Jeffries is just asking, Pete Fardell, your YouTube video, was it Backyard Blairio it's entitled? Is Pete still on?
Backyard Blairio, that's right.
Yeah.
I'll put a link down the side if you like.
That would be perfect. So anyone, if you go onto the chat window within, if you go down to the bottom of Zoom, there is a chat window, and then there you will then find both the link to Mike Stewart's excellent site, ffscale.co.uk, and then the one that Pete Fardell is going to put up shortly.
Okay.
There we go. Any other questions?
Yeah.
Go
George
for it.
has got his hand up.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yep, hear you, George.
Almost a hijack. I'm just going to put something in the chat, folks. If anyone can help, I would be thankful. A long text. Again, nothing to do with this days or night subject, but just the problem I've been having, and there are scale people here. So what better to ask? What better place to ask? Especially since it's a UK subject.
Okay, so it's a request basically for people who can't see the, or maybe can't see the chat window, maybe joining through their phone or whatever else. George is currently researching an Avro 504, but the N version.
Right.
And has been at the Danish Museum a couple of times where the only surviving one exists. But George is basically looking for information to draw a proper 3-view. So it's looking about construction drawings. And are you saying that you actually have the WinSock data file at the moment?
Everything. And when you have one drawing, you know what you have. The minute you have a second drawing, you're lost.
You
When
then doubt
photographs,
yourself.
You discover that everything is inconsistent. You almost give up.
George, think of intermediate scale.
No, thank you.
I was going to say you can't, and you can.
I find it a very good step, because if we want to go back to the subject of kit scale, I will put it bluntly, although this is not the case. The initial concept has failed. The initial concept of a step up for the open classes has provided very limited results, although it has provided us with I entered for the first time last year in Holland with a very successful new class. This cannot be denied on its own, but not as a stepping stone. Correct?
Hello.
I think history does tell us that, but its second objective, George, was to encourage people to take part. And with entries that were rising above 40, I think it was successful on that count.
Yes, I agree on that.
Yeah.
Can I just, in answer to George's question about 504 data, it might be worth getting in touch with Steve Jackson, UK, who's built one for F4C. He's been flying one in F4C for the last 3 or 4 years, and no doubt has amassed a fair amount of documentation for it.
I say he might have done it, but as I'm the UK team manager, I'm trying to sort out his documentation at the moment. His documentation for his actual aircraft is,
all right.
We've had to have some work, but that doesn't mean to say that he will have other information. Because I mean, that's what you find when you're researching a scale model. You find information that's not applicable to your current one, but it'll be useful to someone else. So yeah, I can certainly give you Steve's contact details, George. He would be delighted.
The thing is, my take on this, Graham and George, is that for open classes, you're building to the photographs. So find your photographs and build to those, not to the drawings.
Of course, that is the problem. But you need a drawing to build on, so you have to create your own based on photographs.
You have to create your own drawings from the photographs, your building drawings, yes, indeed. Well, you're capable of that.
I have done it, but it is not an easy task.
but that's your prime source of information for your documentation. It's the photographs, George. And if you've got good photographs of the side of the fuselage and a front view, I mean, the wing plan forms tend not to be not to vary too much between the models, generally speaking. So it's get out the magnifying glass, isn't it?
I have about
Yeah.
300 pictures from the
But
museum.
also, Doug, surely when you can get access to works drawings like I've got for the Compa, and surely there must be some 504 drawings around somewhere.
Well, yeah, you'd hope that the factories would have kept them. It would be good. It's just a matter of whether or not they're in the public domain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
George,
I was going to say,
It's not a matter of discussion for now. If anyone can help, please contact Ian and go back to kit scale because, yeah, anyway.
George has basically said that. I was going to say it's quite an it's a very interesting subject, and it's one that I'm probably going to leave until the darkest nights in December, at least in the Northern Hemisphere, where we can challenge something on how to look towards documentation and how you choose your subject. I might actually just leave that one open, not actually have an actual speaker, but it's something just that interested parties can come in and we can all chat about the challenges that you face and documenting an aircraft that you have a passion about. So if everyone doesn't mind, we'll leave that for now. So anything else on kit scale? I can see one other question on the chat. One just from Paul, sort of talking about contacting the Afro Heritage Museum at Woodford, and he's also given the email address there. And then also Pete Fardell has very kindly put up his very entertaining YouTube videos on the Backyard Blériot. Mr. Carpenter, you've been smiling a lot and not saying much tonight. Would you like to say anything about the Compa Swift with your RC version, apart from... Oh, you just need to unmute yourself, John. It's not normally this long unmuted, is he, Andy?
Still interesting to hear about people having great success with the Compa Swift, whereas mine was an absolute swine. It's radio control notwithstanding, it had a mind of its own most of the time. If you took your eye off it for a second, it would wander off. It never was a great success. I think it's unfinished business for me. I think I might have to have another word with it.
Yeah.
I did a Compa Swift years ago in '78 to the open class rules in those days. It was CO2 powered, and I took it to Woodvale for the first. Was it an international meeting at Woodvale in '78? I can't remember. I think it was, because I ended up with a set of plans for the Fairchild 24 from a chap called Steve Sorger, who got a big radio model there. He just delved in and gave them to me. But the Compa that I had flew far too well, because after a couple of trimming flights, it flew off down the airfield and demolished itself in the side of a caravan. So I ended up I ended up actually flying a peanut model in that competition and coming second, I think, if my memory serves correctly. But the Compa was a delightful little model, nicely done by those standards in those days. Standards have improved these days. But it just flew off beautifully, crashed straight into and it must have been some 300 or 400 yards away as well. So that was the end of that one. I've never done one since, Ricky.
Oh, okay. Well, I can't claim that. I've got about 4.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Doug. There's a couple of things I think George and Graham have both managed to converse through the chat window about some prospective avenues, but I'll just hand over, as there doesn't seem to be too many more questions at the moment, to Bernard from Holland. I was actually half intending coming to Nijmegen this year because I had an opening in my calendar. But next year it is definitely on the calendar because I have set a challenge for the members of the BMFA Scale Technical Committee, where we have to actually sort of like compete in classes. Those of us who are not as well known as competing, I only currently compete in the indoor RC classes, but I'm going to sort out this Stinson, as I've said now. There we go, and then come to Nijmegen next year. So do you want to say a little bit about the event that you hold? I follow it from Mike, again, referencing Mike's superb website.
Yeah, what to say. This year will be the 10th edition. So we'll try to do some special things, but not sure about what yet. But we have a year and a half to think about it. Yeah, and also with the rule changes with the BMFA, we always follow the BMFA rules. And this year we decided to leave the rules as is. So the old 2019 rules, we'll also use them next year. Because first I want to visit the nationals in 2021, and I wanted to do it this year to see how the rules pan out before we take them over and use it at our competition.
Good scheme.
Sensible, yeah. Good.
Yeah, but we can change at two big events that are, I always say it's a little bit a sister event of each other. And we can take a lot of rules changes and then we work it out in April. Oh, it doesn't really work. We need to make some changes. And then, yeah, at our competition, we have the same issues. So I first want to see how it pans out at the nationals before we do anything.
Yeah, as we say, good scheme. And the other thing for us to think of, and Ricky, you're involved in it as well, is that when we actually sort out the way that we're going to go forward, we need to make a formal proposal to the FAI for them to adopt these rules into their sporting code. So that's another task, another activity that the British Scale Tech Committee have got on their list of jobs to do.
Yeah, like what George is saying, worst issue is peanut scale. That's also one of the concerns we have. Peanut scale changed a lot. So first we want to see in April how do the rules hold up in peanut scale and all the other classes, and then see yeah at the end of the year in November if which rules work better, because then a lot of models will see back in November that also are there in April. So let's see what will be the big difference.
Yeah, all sounds good. One thing, well, one small thing I'll say, and then we'll go over to my boss in these sessions, is that I have recently agreed to take over the sort of contest manager role for the indoor nationals, which we'll be holding hopefully in April next year, Doug.
Correct.
Yeah, at Walsall. I do have lots of experience of attending as a judge, although I hadn't been along for a few years, and I've also got experience in the RC side, both indoor and outdoor. But we will be putting out some information in the next sort of like, well, hopefully 2 months at least as a placeholder. But we'll go over to the boss in these sessions, Mr. Warman, our host, who gracefully does all the, pulls together all these PDFs, sits in the background and does an enormous amount of work without actually getting to speak very much. So he's just asked me if he can speak, and of course you can, Roger. What would you like to say?
Well, as we're on a free flight
yeah,
or indoor tonight, I just wondered if anybody who's present tonight has ever heard of anybody called Stan Cole from about 25 years ago.
Yeah, we know Stan Cole's
rings a bell.
You know Stan, Doug?
Scale, yeah. I don't know the man, but he was free flight scale, wasn't he?
Yeah. I inherited all of his original plans.
Oh, right.
Well, I've got about 10, and they are the most masterpieces of plans I've ever seen. They're all based around 20-inch. There's a whole variety of subjects there. So I'll make a list available if anybody wants copies of them. I've got the master, sort of the lithographs that he's drawn. Anybody wants, and there's some unusual subjects as well. So I'll make a list and let you have them.
Yeah, the other thing we could do is we could have a search through the air modelers, because they gave an article on a lot of his models.
Oh, did they? Okay.
And we could sort of combine a link to the plan and the article in the magazine.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I do have them here. So if anybody wants a copy, I'll give a list out, and then maybe you can publish them, and if you want them, we can get copies made. Okay, that's it. Over and out.
Sounds good. Thank you. Well, thanks once again to Roger for everything that he does with us. Thanks also to Mike Smith. Sorry, as another question comes out, but yeah, thanks to Mike Smith for agreeing to be my sounding board for a lot of these presentations, and then formulate an actual itinerary going forward. Huge thanks to Mike Stuart for very informative chat. I'm always fascinated by how well these guys can get their free flight models to fly. Mine don't fly anything like that. And a few things to just say as general stuff. We've got another competition at Druids, an outdoor flying only competition this weekend, which is at the site near Stonehenge. I'm desperately looking for a flying judge, so Steve Jackson and I are looking for a flying judge so that I don't have to do it again, because I've got other responsibilities this weekend. So if there is anyone in the area and has some experience of flight judging, that would be superb. Other couple of things. The next session will be on September the 16th by Mr. Tilbury, who was online earlier. He is still here. Dave, do you want to say just a little bit about what you're going to speak about? Dave is a superb scale modeler, and the detailing that he puts onto the aircraft is fantastic. He is a true artist, I would say, in terms of his finish. So there you go. I've bigged you up. So over to you, Dave.
Yeah, it's interesting you say artist, because I spent 7 years at art college. So that was one of my backgrounds, and also engineering. So the combination of both has sort of led me to where I am today, really. But I've sort of invested over the years in different types of technology. CNC, I've got a small Roland CNC machine, which I'll talk about and what I've done with that. Also, a Zortrax M200 Plus filament printer, and I'll be showing what I do with that one. And also my latest purchase, which is a Formlabs 3 SLA printer. So I'm using all these new sort of technologies to help with my sort of scale builds that I'm working on. And now also retired, I've had more time to do my other side is a small business of supplying scale parts to people all over the world.
Great, thank you, Dave. We shall meet up at Andover Travel Lodge on Saturday night.
Yeah, we will. Yeah.
Ahead of the competition. Look forward to it. Thank you.
Right. Yeah, look forward to it.
September the 30th is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to put myself totally in the firing line along with Paul Antoniessen, our FAI subcommittee chairman. We're going to talk about the future of the F4G competition class, and also about flying only, which is this is outdoor RC, something which is very popular in nations throughout the world, but which is almost it is an introduction to the scale competition, but it's encouraging, as my dad would say, buy a box, throw in a bottle of glue, shake it around, and out comes the aeroplane. So we need to encourage people to do that little bit extra effort, just like change the markings, etc., but also allow these guys to have an introduction to the class, a bit like the way this kit scale started as well. So that will be September the 30th. Also in October, he's not on this evening, but Gwyn Avenel is going to give us a walk around of his exquisite Hawker Fury scratch build, a little bit of an insight to the business side of producing CNC cut kits as well. So that's two or three of the next few sessions, but we've got an interesting itinerary lined up. I hope you agree. So thanks everyone. I'm getting very tired now after having been up since 7 o'clock this morning for the gym and back in to work tomorrow morning. So please feel free to invite some of your club mates. Just email bmfascale@gmail.com if you want to add anyone to the list. Thank you and good evening.
Thank you, Graham.
Bye, everyone.
Cheers.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Cheers,
Bye-bye.
Graham. See you Saturday.
Yeah, see you Saturday.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Graham. Good one.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks, Graham.
Where are we?